Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Well, no mai, haere mai, and welcome into The Hoon. That is the collective noun for the kaka, on the kaka. Great to see you, Peter Bale. I'm Bernard Hickey. How are you?
I'm good, Bernard, thank you. And I see you've been for a swim today. How is spring has sprung on Waiheke, I hope?
Not really. It's one of those sort of, frankly shitty spring days where it doesn't quite know what it wants to do, and it's occasionally a burst of sun, and then there's another blast of cold wind, and then a shower comes through. It's not as bad as living in Wellington, where this month...
Can we blame the government for that?
I'd quite like... No.
Yeah. Okay.
But if I was living in Wellington, we call this month Shitsville, because it's
really?
it's a
I
period
think I
between...
have heard you say that before.
Yeah, it's a period between about May and December when it's absolutely awful to be in Wellington because it's windy and cold and wet. But a little bit further north, this has been a long winter of discontent for the country as a whole, and the weather hasn't helped.
Oh, you're doing a little segue there, haven't you? Aren't you?
Well, trying to bring it in. It's going to be a big week this for assessing the performance of the government and how the public views it, but also what's happening in the rest of the world, which is definitely of interest to us, and we're involved in a big way. Because you're talking to us from the other side of the world.
I am talking to you from the other side of the world, Bernard, and I had lunch with an old friend of mine from CNN yesterday, and who listens rather amazingly to the Hoon over here.
Oh wow!
And he said, what I always realise is that even though we think New Zealand's kind of perfect and down there and nothing could happen, nothing could be wrong, and you look at going swimming all the time and everything and living on Waiheke. He said, but we hear you complaining about the place every time I pick up the Hoon, so we just realise that everybody's got the same complaints. And then another friend of mine who lives in Myanmar, oddly, said he was reading your kaka and had decided that New Zealand had basically caught fire.
Well, I got
a smouldering ruin.
I've got to keep the place from being overcrowded somehow.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it could be worse. It's true. We could be living in the United States, and Britain sounds like it's pretty tough at the moment too.
This is of course, during that period with Boris Johnson, you did get the impression that England was kind of on fire, and I've been really struck how thriving and buoyant London feels at the moment. I mean, despite the Sharia law being imposed and the machine gun emplacements on Primrose Hill, it's actually very, very nice. But there's a huge amount of construction going on, as always, and I've been doing some of those what we might have, in fact, what Artie Farty 97 might have called Artie Farty things. I went to a Grayson Perry exhibition at the Wallace Gallery yesterday, which was absolutely marvellous, and I hadn't really thought much about Grayson Perry, although known his work, and it's just a remarkable confection. And then the other day I went to the Victorian Albert new storehouse in East London, where they've essentially opened their back office, opened their warehouse as an exhibition space, and it is just astoundingly bold and huge and spectacular and intriguing. And went to the David Bowie centre there, where David Bowie's archive is held, and you can say, would you please get me down the Ziggy Stardust outfit from there,
wow.
and look at it and go through it and go through his records, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty amazing. But yeah, Sharia law here is very difficult, Bernard. We're all having to wear black all the time and bow down to Sadiq Khan.
Trump is on some sort of different planet, and it's hard to imagine that he's going to surprise us again
and then he does every day.
And every time. I mean, that rant in the United Nations was quite a thing. Fantastic.
Did you hear the real estate part of that, Bernard?
No, I make a point of never listening to Trump verbatim in real time because I throw too many things at the screen.
Yes. Well, the real estate one was, so of course he had the issue with the escalator, because the escalator stopped, probably because a White House videographer was at the top of it and pointing the wrong way on the escalator, videoing him coming up the escalator, and that is probably
we've all been there.
Rather than an escalator conspiracy. But I was thinking, of course, it was the opposite of when he came down the escalator nearly 10 years ago in Trump Tower. But the real estate element of that weird 2-hour rant, which included the claims about Sharia law in London and attacks on Sadiq Khan, was completely unhinged and talked about having proposed, I think it was a $500 million revamp of the United Nations building. They'd chosen someone else, and that was why they were standing on terrazzo, not on marble. He'd promised them marble, and they'd got terrazzo, and it went on and on and on. So at least he is a consistent real estate guy. But
yeah, you must have heard from the audience, people going, "Please turn on the teleprompter."
Yeah, but if you think about that building, that's Marcel Breuer, Le Corbusier, and who else? There's a third one who I can't quite immediately recall, who did that building in the 1950s. I mean, and the idea of letting Donald Trump developer loose with his marble and his stick-on gold patches to that rather sacred building. But I'll be interested when we get to Robert Patman. As usual, we've got Professor Patman on, and just what he thinks. I mean, we said last couple of weeks looked forward to the General Assembly. It's a pretty extraordinary. I guess we'll be talking about it a little bit with Catherine shortly because of the climate conference, and maybe, just maybe, let's talk to Robert about this. Maybe the General Assembly has made itself, if not more relevant, then at least taken on the Trump White House by with the large-scale recognition of a Palestinian state, the climate conference, and maybe a few other things. Because Trump didn't literally pull out of the United Nations, although there seemed to be a subtext of that.
Yeah, it's the biggest show in town, and watching Emmanuel Macron being stuck on a street corner because he couldn't get through
Yes.
through the blockade for the motorcade is sort of fun. It's been quite a week there at the UN General Assembly, where our Prime Minister decided not to go, but sent Winston Peters, who will tell us all. The suspense is just killing us all.
Is he speaking today?
He's going to speak on Saturday, our time. And so that's Friday night, your time. And we'll find out then whether or not we're going to recognise Palestine as a state. Just extraordinary that we're having to sort of wait like it's some sort of, final of the Celebrity Apprentice or something.
Well, let's talk about that with Rob. What else have we got today, Robert? Bernard? What else
Well,
have we got today, Bernard?
we're going to talk about, I hope, the extraordinary deal that hasn't had a lot of attention between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which has thrown people a little bit. And obviously, with Catherine in a moment, we're going to talk about the latest intervention from China on climate change and where we're headed with the 1.5 degrees thing.
Which I believe does not involve a gigantic and incorrect attack on windmills.
No, or the claim that it's a great big hoax and that we should all ignore climate change. And then for good measure, of course, he threw in this thing about don't take Tylenol, which for everyone in New Zealand is paracetamol. So hopefully we'll ignore that. But it's been quite a week for weird and wild events and extraordinary statements from people who should know much better. And at the moment, it seems, Catherine, that the most sensible. It seems like the most sensible words on the planet are coming from a country which is a self-avowed Marxist-Leninist dictatorship, which many people in the world think is doing all sorts of harm to its own people, let alone the environment. But Xi Jinping surprised everyone with an intervention today at the UN General Assembly. Could you talk to us about what he said and what it meant?
Yeah, he sounded really sensible compared to who he followed on to, right? So, yeah, Xi Jinping, they talked about the climate targets that China is setting, and they've set them at 7 to 10% reduction in emissions below their peak by 2035. And I know that there's lots of critics looking at that and going, oh, well, we were kind of hoping for at least 15%. But I I think China has a different relationship with its climate targets compared to other countries, particularly countries like Aotearoa, in the sense that they're setting targets that I think they feel confident that they can achieve without too much effort. And then if they can, they will blow right past them. And they have done that in the past. They've gone much higher and faster than the targets that they actually set for stuff like this. And so, I think that there's a good chance that they will do that again this time, that they will actually end up achieving something more advanced than the targets that they're actually setting. So they're also talking about raising their non-fossil share of energy to at least 30% and boosting their wind and solar sectors to 3,600 gigawatts. And so I think the thing about those targets for China, part of what makes it different is probably just their way of setting targets and chasing them. But I think the other thing is that this stuff is actually good for China strategically. You know, it makes sense for them to be a leader in this area. It's all kind of upside to push faster than that if they can.
And they had a plan for it. 10 years ago, they came out with a 10-year plan, which said we are going to be the world leader in renewable technology, particularly solar and batteries and electric vehicles. And at that point they weren't. and now they are. You know, we're seeing all sorts of weird and wonderful brands popping up on the street. China dominating the world's market for electric cars, let alone panels and batteries. And quite amazingly for a government and a leader, they do the whole under-promise and over-deliver thing rather than the over-deliver, under-promise thing that we do in the West.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the other thing for China is that they're not big in fossil fuels. And so a shift in the world away from that and towards, you know, these other forms of renewable energy benefits China strategically. So they're going to want to do that if they can. Unlike a lot of other countries, like in New Zealand, if we set a target and then we found that we were exceeding it, we would just slow down. You know? We would hit reverse
you don't
gears.
Want to make too much effort. That'll be a bit of a try hard move.
She'll be right.
Yeah, exactly. We'd hit the reverse thrusters on that one. So, yeah, very different kind of relationship with their targets to what some of the rest of us have.
And it's actually an opportunity for us too. Unlike some other parts of the world which want to develop their own industries in solar and batteries and electric vehicles, we of course don't and probably never would or should. But because the Europeans and the Americans are trying to push away all of that extra surplus production that China is pumping out, it's actually an opportunity for us to bring it in. And as we discovered this week, Transpower came out with an analysis showing that the first big grid-scale battery up in Northland that Meridian's put on in Ruakaka has actually depressed wholesale prices because they're doing what a battery should do, buying it when it's cheap, selling it when it's expensive, and lowering the average price. And so it's a huge opportunity which we're missing.
I really would like to see more of the opportunity to have more distributed energy systems as well, which gives a little more control and sovereignty to small towns and to, you know, so people can control their future a little bit better. I think that's going to be quite important going into the future. It's a really good thing for local areas in terms of stimulating economies.
Catherine, to go back to, in a sense, to our session last week with Tex Edwards, there's no incentive in the power companies to do any of this. We've seen no regulatory shift of any import to get those gentailers working differently. Have we, Bernard and Catherine?
Yeah, we are waiting with bated breath for them to come out with a plan that makes sense, but not with a huge amount of confidence either. I think they're more likely to tinker around the edges, but yeah, wouldn't it be good if they did? Because it would be beneficial to, you know, all New Zealanders and to a big part of the business sector in the country as well. If we had, you know, a better plan going forward in terms of reducing costs but also, you know, we could really do with a good plan for how we can manage and shape our energy demand. And that's another thing that can't really happen under the current kind of system, the way it runs, because of the marginal prices. So, you know, we could reduce by a lot what peak demand we actually need to be able to deliver on if we manage that better.
Yeah, we just don't do demand management. It's extraordinary to me that there are, millions, or well over a million hot water heaters, all of which have ripple control built into them. It's hardly ever used as a tool to reduce our demand in those winter months. And although our lakes are full again, it will come around, particularly now we're building all these data centers. Interesting on the whole. Public view on climate change, when you've got Donald Trump saying things extraordinary again in the United Nations. Yeah. And, both of our deputy prime ministers, David Seymour and Winston Peters, have at times expressed climate skeptic adjacent views or worse. Both have said they want to pull out of the Paris Agreement. But a really interesting piece from Kevin Trenberth today on this issue of information, misinformation, and the public view. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so he wrote a piece for Newsweek, just basically re-emphasising what all the things that Donald Trump was saying that were wrong, and that we have clear, reports and information and data on that make it clear that he's wrong. And I kind of think, as if we needed a reminder, but it is every now and again you see Donald Trump do a speech where you just go, oh, that's right, he is a blithering idiot. And I'm not sure we need the reminder, but again, sometimes it just, you just hear it and you just go, holy cow, how on earth did they give this guy this much power? It's just incredible.
How would your mother feel about you using the words holy cow, Catherine? That's outrageous.
My mother. I think you're asking the wrong person here, because my mother's not strong on the religious genes, put it that way.
Yeah. Catherine, a couple of weeks ago we had the little hammer thrower David Seymour talking about revising or making a stunt really about revising the Paris Agreement. Has that had any traction? Do we see any traction with the government? Because again, I believe we had Nicola Willis talking about oil and gas yesterday as part of the Go for Growth thing. So what do you think the government /ACT are doing in this area at the moment?
I haven't seen much. I don't know. I have not seen them doing much that is useful in terms of bringing in new policies or setting new.
But did we see that getting any traction?
Done.
Other than publicity and him spinning a hammer in his hands, did it gain any evidence of traction with the rest of the government?
So one of the really interesting things about Seymour and Peters on climate change is that when they're not in charge, they can make all sorts of outrageous statements and, grab that 7 or 8% of the old man shaking at the fist at the sky vote, the anti-vax, anti-woke, road cone chewing brigade that actually was probably the swing factor in the election, and that they're both going for, knowing that they're never going to be responsible for actually pulling out, being the prime minister who turns up and says, we've decided to pull out. So they're safe in a way. They can be performative and grab the attention of old men shaking fist. That includes people my age with the same coloured hair, and get away with it. And I think that's a risk for them. They're playing a dangerous game there, because you know what? If we get to the election and for whatever reason there is the government gets in again, and ACT and New Zealand First are major players in it, the government will be in a position of thinking that it has to negotiate with them, and that will be one of the things that you could use as a negotiating tool, because it's not going to hurt your main aims, which are to get the economy growing and to talk about cost of living all the time. And that's the risk, I think, for the government and us, actually, that what started out as a performative thing turns accidentally into an actual policy change.
Yeah, which wouldn't, help anybody, given that, within the Paris Agreement, it's although you have to say what your targets are, there's no bad prize for missing them. You know what I mean? So there's no there's no real reason to jump out of it other than performative stuff. I think we've mentioned that before. Yeah. The other thing I would watch out for is that where Trump is at the moment, I have a question mark about whether there will be a big backlash against that down the line a bit, and whether it then swings, potentially quite wildly into the more kind of proactive space in the future in the US, and then where do we sit?
Yeah, no, I suspect a lot of receipts are being gathered at the moment. They're being put away in nice, quiet places, so that when the wind does shift, people can pull them out and say, "Well, I remember what you did in 2025," and people should remember that there will be long memories, there will be receipts, and it will come back, and that's the problem when you're essentially thinking that people's memories and policies will overcome actual science, because that's not
Bernard,
going away.
for some reason, I've just been thinking that I think it's a bit of an old joke, but the risk in denial is not just the crocodiles.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah,
I'll be taking over from Jimmy Kimmel next week. Speaking of which,
Catherine, thank you very much.
Our very own Jon Stewart and Jimmy Kimmel, Professor Robert Patman. You're looking very sharp today. Have you got a new camera?
No. Actually, I've still haven't got my microphone, so we're having to.
Well, you're
operate
looking
with
very good. You're looking very good, Robert. Now, how much of the 2-hour Trump speech to the United Nations General Assembly did you watch? Because we were just talking before you came in. I think I seem to be the only one here who listened to the real estate section, about where he raved about having pitched to the United Nations a revamp of the building, and complained that they'd only chosen terrazzo and been ripped off. Very weird.
Yeah, it was a really bizarre speech in many respects, and apparently the teleprompter gave out after a while.
Probably
And,
just through sheer exhaustion.
according to, well, yeah, perhaps. I did like Gavin Newsom's team's take on the breaking the telecom. Apparently it didn't break, but it was ordering Trump to stop.
Well, it's,
He
I don't know
interpreted
whether,
that as a breakdown, but in fact, it was a rational function. But
because of course it had a green, an orange, and a red light flashing in front of him, and the red light was flashing for about 90 minutes there of the 2 hours. And so, what do you make? I mean, we talked a couple of times in the last 2 weeks about the UNGA. I was just speculating before you got here at the start of the show with Bernard about whether the conference about Palestine and Gaza, the recognition of those of a putative Palestinian state, and this climate conference with Xi turning up, whether that suggests that there is a kind of revival inside the UNGA, inside the non-US United Nations.
possibly, but I think that what we're witnessing at the moment is a lack of global leadership on crucial issues. We've spoken a lot about Gaza and Ukraine. There's been a lack of global leadership because the UN Security Council has been paralyzed. But there's also been a lack of leadership on issues, which I imagine you've been talking with Catherine, climate change, which is a really, possibly the most dangerous threat to the planet, perhaps apart from Atlas 3I, according to some observers like Harvey Loeb at Harvard University. But he's not saying it's a danger. He's just saying he's saying this comet may not be a comet. Anyway, that's a bit of a distraction, but you take my point. The superpowers are not leading on issues which affect the interests of many countries. Middle powers, which are the majority, and small powers also in the majority. And I think they're beginning to realize that they have to exert some agency, and we're beginning to see that on a number of areas. And a very interesting piece in The Guardian the other day suggesting that the discussions between amongst liberal democracies which reject the Trump vision of international relations are proceeding. So there's obviously things going on behind the scene.
What did you see? I mean, is China filling that vacuum? I mean, is that Xi turns up?
No, I think a number of liberal democracies do not see either the Trump vision or the Xi Jinping vision. The Chinese vision, by the way, is quite conservative, and it's authoritarian. Also, with China giving, it would appear, increasing support to Putin's increasingly failing effort in Ukraine. This is, China's got a lot at stake now in Ukraine. So I think that's another thing for many liberal democracies. They are happy to trade with China, but remain wary about any political alignment with them. And I don't think that's going to change. And the other interesting thing is that there seems to be the beginnings of discussions between liberal democracies, which are middle powers like France, and what might be called countries in the global south. In a sense, there are a number of liberal democracies which actually quite admired what South Africa did in taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. Some of them didn't have the political courage to express that admiration openly, but I think they do realize that you can't go on having double standards. You can't say you support international law, a rules-based international order, but you do nothing to uphold it, particularly when it involves an ally. So, and I think that's the point that's being, I think there's an opportunity here to build a bridge with the countries of the global south, particularly those big democracies like South Africa and Brazil.
And especially when you've got Lula in Brazil standing
China
up to you-know-who.
Yeah. So I think there's opportunity there.
And Robert, it seems that the economic pressure on Russia has really ramped up in recent times with the announcement this week from the finance ministry that it wants to increase the GST rate in Russia from 20% to 22%. And also, and this could be quite dangerous, to lower the threshold for having to declare GST for a lot of small businesses. So just like in New Zealand, you don't have to collect and pay GST if you earn less than $60,000. And in Russia, the plan is to reduce that threshold. Are there signs of real economic pressure building on Russia?
Yes, apparently, if you're a Russian living in Crimea, you cannot get gasoline at all now. These relentless strikes on the energy infrastructure of Russia have gone along, have been sustained since we last spoke, every night. And it's having a cumulative effect. The interesting thing is that the narrative still hasn't changed in the United States too much. It's still saying that Russia's winning this war. But let's think about this. After 3.5 years, and the expectation that Russia would basically overrun Kiev within weeks, Russia only has control of about 19 or 20% of Ukraine. And that can hardly be classified as an outstanding victory, particularly when it's come at enormous costs, both economically, which we're beginning to see. I think the turning point, Bernard, in terms of the economic pain, is the fact that the Ukrainians are increasingly hitting Russia's home territory. Even if it's infrastructure damage, it all adds up. And it's really, I know we spoke about this before, but I think for Putin, this is a dangerous moment, both economically and politically, because, the unspoken contract between authoritarian governments and their citizens is that you may not like what I'm doing, but I do provide security for you and perhaps reasonable material conditions.
And it was interesting.
Sure we would ever discuss Russian GST, so I'm now expecting Bernard to launch into a thing about the Russian housing market. Bernard, are you an expert on the Russian housing market?
No, but I know that our GST system is better than the Russian one.
But Bernard, Robert,
probably less corrupt.
Yes, that's right. Just before we jump into the Middle East, it struck me. I mean, you listen to Trump with half an ear, and he always seems to repeat the last thing he was told by the last person. But for him to come out this week and say that he thought it was appropriate for Ukraine to try and take back all of its territory, and that he seemed to think now that Ukraine were winning, was quite a thing.
Yeah, but it's taken 9 months, and I don't actually take it other than I think next time he gets another phone call from Vladimir, he will be reminded of his obligations to apparently Kremlin support for him over many years, and I think he'll row back from that position It's performative. And by the way, he hasn't substantively changed his position. He said he will impose enhanced tariffs on Russia's trading partners if, such as India and China. It was already imposed increased tariffs on India, but also China and Turkey. No, not Turkey. Sorry. If the Europeans, which include, I think it's Turkey, Hungary, and Slovakia, all buy Russian oil. He said if they stop buying Russian oil, then he'll go ahead with his sanctions. He knows that's unlikely to happen, given Erdogan's the dependence of Erdogan both politically and economically on Russia. So it's a pretty safe thing to say, I'll do this if you do that, knowing full well that, you know, that condition is unlikely to be met. And I don't see that Trump substantively, he's had 9 months to get tough with Putin. Putin hasn't changed. Putin's made it quite, he doesn't recognize Ukraine as a sovereign state, and he's invaded it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, Putin's going to keep pushing. What's interesting, of course, is the fact that Putin is now feeling the need, apparently, to sanction drones and air incursions in a number of NATO countries. There's been some incredible, I mean, you probably saw it in the last 12 hours, incursions by drones in Denmark. And it's not quite clear whether they're Russian drones, because remember, America was plagued by mysterious drones before. I think it was the end of last year or towards November last year. And no one could really identify them.
No, it does seem highly suspicious there and in Oslo.
Yeah, I think the Danish
Copenhagen
government
Airport and Oslo,
seems to be hinting it's Russia.
Just on that issue of, you know, America's standing in the world and its ability to, you know, gather its allies. I thought it was fascinating this week, and it may not have got a lot of coverage here, but Saudi Arabia has finally done a deal with Pakistan in which they pledged to defend each other. And it means now that Saudi Arabia effectively has access to Pakistan's nuclear weapons in a contest, if it needed to, with Israel. What did you think of that?
Or Iran.
Yes. What did you think of that news?
It was very interesting, although Pakistan's military have a reputation for over-promising rather than delivering. Their relationship with Saudi Arabia goes back quite a long way. But it is an interesting development, and it does reflect the frustrations, I think, that some of the Gulf states feel over America's inability to really rein in Israel. I mean, that attack on Qatar seemed to be a bit of a line in the sand for many of these states. And it was the second time Qatar was attacked. Its territorial integrity was the first time was by Iran, but that was a sort of choreographed thing. Where the Americans played a part in intercepting the Iranians' drones. But the second attack, of course, they had no idea about it until 10 minutes into the attack. And I do think that has been, I think the blowback that has developed has been very significant. And I think, the first sign of that blowback taking shape is the Saudi-Pakistan agreement concerning mutual military assistance along the lines of NATO. If either of us attack, one will go to the assistance of the other. They are hoping to expand that model to a number of other Islamic countries. I think they realize from Saudi's point of view, and certainly I think increasingly from Egypt's point of view, they feel that Israel has to be deterred in some way, and they can't rely on America to do it.
Robert, we've got the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, speaking tomorrow at the General Assembly. What's your betting about where New Zealand's going to go on recognising a putative Palestinian state?
Well, I think he's going to recognise a Palestinian state. It wouldn't have escaped him that the Italian government decided not to take the final step of recognising
subject to the hostages, right? They linked it to the hostages, which is not a completely mad
real
way to do
domestic backlash. And also, there's been some rather cruel cartoons this week pertaining to the government leading from the rear on this issue. I think they'll be risking. I think the risks of not recognising outweigh the risk occur, and there will be risks for the government in recognising domestic political risks for the coalition in recognising Palestinian statehood. But I believe on balance, the government probably will, probably because I think Mr. Peters himself and also the Prime Minister take the view that enough is enough, that they've tried everything.
So you would say the political...
New Zealand has been pretty tongue-tied on some significant escalations by Israel. And there's only, it's very interesting to me. I know it's not scientific, but TVNZ recently just interviewed a number of people in the street. You may have seen the news clip. And it was surprising, out of, I think, the 3 people they interviewed, different age ranges, they were all very critical of New Zealand's approach to the Gaza issue. And that, in fact, so that was quite interesting.
I mean, Vox Pops, as you know, are a bit difficult. But are you saying, Robert, last question, are you saying that you think the political risk is in favour of recognising a Palestinian state? But
well, look, if you're a government
rather than not.
say, well, let's be quite clear here. The reason I think the government will recognise the Palestinian state is because of its past statements. It was the first country, apart from Ireland, to call for immediate humanitarian ceasefire back on the 27th of October, 2023. Mr. Peters then said, quite shortly afterwards, there is no military solution to what is a political conflict. Thirdly, Mr. Peters has already made it plain that he holds the UN Security Council, and by implication, the United States, although he doesn't say that part out loud, responsible for the perpetuation of this conflict. Now, given that background, I would be very surprised if one of the countries that was the first to break ranks with the other Five Eyes members and other liberal democracies effectively lost its nerve in following through logically to the position.
Yeah. Robert, thank you very much.
Thank you,
go now to a domestic story. Thank you so much, Robert. See you soon. I'll be back next week.
Bye.
Luke, how are you? We've got Luke Campbell, which I have to declare an interest in because Luke is my nephew. And so we're doing a little bit of nepotism here. And Luke, you're here because you're a school teacher, primary school teacher, union rep, I think, for your school, one of them. And you're proposing to go on strike just after we've had a week of strikes, I think, by the Post-Primary Teachers Association. Is that right?
Yep. So the PPTA have been doing sort of rolling strikes. So they're not actually going on strike, the whole lot of them at once, but just not teaching certain years and things like that. So yeah, they're just kind of easing into it, as it were.
And so you are already taking action, is that right? Sort of almost a work to rule basis, is that right?
Not me personally. There's been a lot of discussion. At the moment, it's mainly people are talking about the ideas of what they're doing, but I don't think anyone's actually taken those steps yet.
What's brought us to this stage, Luke? Because the government says it's gone far enough. Brian Roach, the head of the civil service, has criticised the Post-Primary Teachers Association. What are the circumstances? Is it just wages? Is it salary? Is it conditions in the classroom? What's bringing you to this point?
Well, it's kind of a combination of everything. One of the things that's happening is we're getting the sort of Singapore model. We're getting a lot of sort of stuff that's sort of put onto us rather than us taking the lead with stuff.
What is the Singapore model, Luke? Because I mean, Singapore does pretty well in its in its education system. Is it that you feel or that the union teachers generally feel that there's a kind of neoliberal agenda here? That sounds rather political.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's happened this year is kind of unprecedented. For a start, we've had certain roles that are just completely gone that have never been touched before.
Like what?
Like reading recovery. Reading recovery teachers are gone now. and everyone had to sort of choose from a few sort of prescriptive options. And one of the things that we're doing is basically we're following this model of teaching, and it's very restrictive and it's very prescriptive, and it takes away a lot of autonomy. And the thing is, it doesn't really work that well for our kids. And basically, I'm not against innovation. Some aspects of the BSLA system from the Canterbury University are actually quite good, and I guess that's more of the structured literacy, and it needs a bit of tweaking, and I think that's what you expect when you're rolling something out. But at least it's a New Zealand grown system. It's not like the prime maths system that we're getting is from Scholastic, and basically it's very inflexible. You might have a kid that you're trying to teach place value, and I know from 25 years of experience what to do, but then I have to follow the script, and sometimes it will be so inflexible. You've got a kid who maybe has been away for a couple of weeks with a flu, but you've still got to teach lesson 5B, and it just doesn't account for that sort of thing.
Luke, what do you think that the government, because this really has been driven from the top and by the new minister and associate minister for education, why don't they trust you? What's the problem they think that has to be solved, and why are they doing it this way, top down?
Yeah, it's very much a top down thing. That's one of the things I thought about while I was sort of writing some notes to go with this. I don't know why they don't trust us. It seems like everyone in the public sector is being asked to do more with less. And one of the things that I think about when that happens is safety. For example, everyone in the public sector, basically they're cutting our resources, and that jeopardizes safety. And in some of these areas, like, how would you like an overworked health professional to be looking after you? Would you like an overworked firefighter to be trying to put out fires, or under-equipped firefighters? I mean, these are all just really, really bad management ideas, and there's long-term consequences for these workers, for teachers who are overworked and stressed out, and they can't make if we're not educating kids to the best of our ability, that's damaging our future, because those kids are going to be our future carers, our future workers.
One thing that strikes me is that the government thinks that our poor education results in various measures are a result of bad teaching, and all you need to do is change the teaching system to get a better result. When most people who look at this in a holistic way will say, 30 years ago, we started driving people into the most awful poverty, disrupting family groups and whānau and iwi, making it really expensive to live in a house if you've got a house. 25% of our kids are now hungry, according to various measures, and you report out this week.
And that makes them really hard to teach.
Yeah.
I can tell you.
Yeah, and it's almost as if they're denying the problems of poverty and inequity, and think that it can be solved just by squeezing more out of the lemon or slicing the lemon in a different way.
Yeah. Well, one thing that the NZEI, which is my union, the Primary Schools Union, commissioned a report in 2021, and they had 3 people to look into it. And it was an independent report commissioned by them. And basically they came to the conclusion, they said, teachers do not have the time and support they need to ensure quality teaching for all learners. Principals do not have the time and support to lead and manage the complex organisations that are modern schools, and talked about schools being required to deal with a myriad of other issues, not just teaching kids, feeding kids, the welfare of kids, the mental health of kids, the physical, all the stuff that comes with like the wraparound support that kids need to really thrive. And they said basically that they think that the system needs to be redesigned to handle the complexities and realities of learning, because they found that there were initiatives, but they were inconsistent, underfunded, inequitable, and inflexible. And this is more of what we're seeing from them. And what I found really interesting the other day, I was looking at the Herald, and there was an article in there from Catherine McGrath, who's the Westpac chief executive, and she was saying this is someone from the business community, right, a conservative person. She said businesses struggle with swings between administrations. Progress is paused as the public sector works out how to articulate the change, and she called on political leaders to take a bipartisan approach. And this is from the business community, Nationals voters. They're saying, hang on, guys, stop rocking the boat and changing direction every 5 minutes, because we need stability. And that's basically what we're asking for in a lot of ways, is we want something, we don't want to change every time there's a new government coming in. We want some stability, and we want we want to be valued. We don't want people taking off to Australia because they just don't feel valued and they can't pay their mortgages and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, Catherine McGrath was talking about a business sentiment survey that came out this week with the Mood of the Boardroom survey, which we're going to talk about with Patrick Smelly in a minute. That survey of over 100 executives by Business New Zealand found that 61%, and it was the highest share, said that the reversals of government policies were the top amongst the top 5 concerns of the business community. So you're not the only ones. Just finally from me, what's the mood amongst teachers? Because as well as being told to make this curriculum and other changes, they're offering you 1% pay increase. What's the mood amongst you and your colleagues?
A majority of us are pretty angry. I mean, the teacher aides they worked so hard, and they weren't even offered 1% at the beginning, and the negotiations have been really, I've talked to some of the people involved, and it's been pretty hard. I just want to say a couple of things about one thing that I've noticed.
Though, Luke, but go right ahead, and we've got another guest waiting. But go right ahead.
So I currently teach in what's called an MLE, which is called a modern learning environment, which basically is where you get a really big classroom and you stick twice the amount of kids in it, or 3 times, and so you have 2 teachers or 3 teachers now. So even with 2 really experienced teachers that we have, we struggle sometimes to get the best out of the kids with the space that we have. Can you imagine if you've got a kid and you're trying to teach them the difference between th as in thumb and f as in funny? It's a very subtle difference. And imagine the noise that, say you had 25 kids in the class, which is a normal class size, versus 52 kids, which is how many I've got in my class. Imagine the struggle, and then of just trying to hear the difference between f and th, and then
we struggle
you
with
have
that
kids
here,
with learning needs,
Lucas,
and all that stuff.
Yeah, we're fucked sometimes when we're trying to find the difference between f and f. Lucas, what you mentioned? I've got 2 questions. One, you mentioned, or Bernard mentioned, and then you said about kids who come to school hungry. How does that manifest? Is that real? Does it manifest itself in your school, in your classroom?
Yeah. I mean, basically what we do is we have a cupboard with snacks, and I know the kids that I have to check to make sure they've got some lunch. And every day I'm like, hi, man. And the thing is, when you deal with that, you can't shame the kids.
Correct.
By giving them some lunch. You've got to be really subtle about it. I know the kids that come in early, and I just quietly give them a little sandwich or some little snacks. Like I give them a selection of stuff that we've got in the cupboard, and they pick something out. We've got a great teacher aide who makes sandwiches for them in the morning, and we just very subtly look after them and just make sure that they're going to make it through the day. And
so it's real.
It's so real, and especially in a place and especially in West Auckland, I think, and South Auckland, and you ask any of the teachers from those areas, and it's just so common.
One Swiftie, as it were, as well. So imagine that I'm a grumpy Pakeha, which is very hard to imagine. I know, and you've already defamed the poor woman from Westpac by suggesting that she should be conservative. But what about the idea that you're a bunch of lefty outriders for the Labour Party? You've already, thrown te reo down the throats of our children, and what we want is the bloody 3 hours, and it doesn't mean rangatoto.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of it's the sort of, yeah, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, just, yeah, it just makes me think of dinosaurs, not the good kind.
Well placed poster too was noticed, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we do. The thing is, you can teach the 3 R's. You can teach reading, writing, and maths, but you can also integrate it with things that the kids are going to enjoy and be motivated by. It's not just about, okay, we're just going to learn how to spell these 10 words and that's it. You've got to make things engaging and get the kids interested and create a lifelong learner rather than just, here is the prescription. You just got to follow this.
Well, look, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for wearing the
Thank you,
shirt I
Luke.
gave you for your birthday, which I still admit that I bloody adore. And
I bet the kids love it
or
too.
The kids love it. I wear it on Matariki.
Ah, fantastic.
But Luke, is it Diplodocus or Diplodocus?
I don't know. The question really is, what happened to the Brontosaurus, mate?
Ah, yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah. It's a bit like the branding of the orca versus the killer whale.
All right.
Speaking of killer whales, here's Patrick.
Patrick, lovely to see you. I was wondering how Peter was going to segue to a discussion with a financial journalist when we were just talking about dinosaurs. The three of us are in that category, I think. Patrick, lovely to see you. Patrick Smelly, the founding editor of Business Desk, and has been busy this week. Tell us about the mood of the boardroom. How does the boardroom feel right now?
If I was to sum it up, I'd say the boardroom sort of still expects the government to win in 2026. It was very worried that it might not. And the message that it sent to the government, to the extent that it can do so through something which is basically a media product, but still has political impact because of its regularity and its credibility. Big turnout from both major parties. And from Shane Jones and various others. It's a real thing.
Yeah, and what did you think of Nicola Willis, who to be fair, fronted? You would expect her to be there, I suppose, but she was turning up to a very bad performance appraisal, it
felt like a public execution.
Yeah,
because,
of her or them?
Both.
Well, I was reflecting on the extent to which a minister turning up to this bloody thing would be thinking, there's no upside in this for me. I've read it. I'm 13th in the cabinet. Bloody ducks, and he's not even here, and he's 15th. And the first question you get is who knifes who, which is what I was thinking going into it, to be perfectly honest. I'm thinking these are terrible results. And what it really says is that at the top of the government, two ministers who are not resonating with the public at all. You kind of can't help but think one of them's probably got to go. But if I was in the National Party cabinet and a member of that cabinet trying to keep things, on some sort of even keel, I would also be listening to the undercurrent that was in the boardroom, which says actually the economy is recovering because eventually all economies recover to some extent, and you can't cut interest rates this hard, you can't have commodity prices this high, you can't have farmers putting all that money in their pockets. A weaker dollar, it's actually been quite strong, really. It's finally giving up a bit of the ghost, but that'll be useful for export returns. I mean, it's going to be a regionally, rurally based recovery, but it will start to spread into the cities. But how long will that take? It's taking so long. And if you were in the National Party cabinet, you say, well, what's the best thing to do? Shall we look disunified, have an enormous fight over who's going to lead the thing, only to discover that the economy actually was recovering next February, and we just made our prospects even worse because
have you seen this before, Patrick?
Useless.
You've been a political reporter for a very long time, not to go back to the T-Rex and dinosaur discussions, but does this remind you of any previous national government that derailed itself?
Well, I've only really been studying this since the Precambrian era.
Yeah.
But no,
It
I
reminds
can't
you
think
of
of
Dick
it.
Seddon.
Well, I suppose governments do run out of steam in the sense that Bolger going up to Shipley in '99 or '98, whenever it was. But that was more of a sort of a natural process. I think the problem that the Nats have is quite simple. If you are broadly supportive of their agenda, which I know that Bernard's not entirely a complete fan, but you know, it will take time for a more permissive environment around consenting to have an impact. It will take time for infrastructure projects to be let. And I think this is the biggest mistake the government made, was to put the brakes on so many infrastructure projects early, because it just gave all these big firms with stuff on their books, and they went, oh my God, what? This is not happening. And you see this sort of feeble responses this week, like giving tradies work to do it to do up hospitals and schools. I mean, it's fantastic for sales of paint, but in terms of the infrastructure needs of the country, we really it's tragic what's happened.
Yeah.
Patrick, before Bernard asked you about the Reserve Bank, which I know he's desperate to before we get to the top of the hour, what do you make of what we sometimes comment on? We don't have you on nearly enough, partly because the audience has had definitely enough of three grey-haired
grizzled
men.
old farts.
Grizzled old dinosaurs.
Get your question out, man. It's only a minute. I've got a lot to say.
Excuse me, this is my podcast, not yours. It's ours.
Not anymore, buddy.
ACT and New Zealand First, do you see them outflanking National and sort of acting with completely independent agendas and garnering a great deal more publicity and space than they otherwise would?
Well, that's their job. I mean, that's the problem with the bipartisanship model that was being sort of touted at the boardroom breakfast yesterday, is that political parties were not created in order to agree with each other. That's the nature of democracy, that they should disagree. I mean, I think I can't quite answer your question, but I'd put it this way: New Zealand First is on a tear because economic nationalism is the new neoliberalism. And they've been preaching that and banging that drum for a long, long time, and suddenly it kind of looks right. ACT, I think, is starting to look annoying to a lot of people, and you can see, New Zealand First is holding up in a way which is pretty interesting. The only more interesting vote hold-up that I can see is the Greens, who just, it doesn't matter what they do, they've got about 13-14%, it seems. But I think ACT is on the slide, and they need to be cognizant of the fact that it's not the United States. People haven't lost their minds, and there are things which we care about here which are not in tune with where ACT comes from on some issues.
Patrick, what do you think the government is going to do, if anything, about this slow economy? It's been notable in the last few weeks. There's been more of these announcements, $7 billion in the ground by Christmas, and with announcements about the schools coming through and the contract to build the Dunedin Hospital. You get a sense they know they need to get stuff in the ground and in people's accounts to zhoosh things up a bit.
I think they've known that from day one, but they haven't. They've underestimated how difficult it would be to get that stuff going again. And I think that's probably the biggest single lesson for the most useful bipartisan thing that a government could do, which I think it's almost like they've got to get the spades in the ground. As Bishop says this, you've got to get the spades in the ground before the election, because then you have to finish it.
Yeah.
If you're still talking about it before the elections, when the election's held, it's easy to cancel. And unfortunately, National fell into a bit of a trap in that respect. They cancelled lots of stuff that they thought was rubbish, and they might have been right. But man, did it put a hole in economic activity.
That seems to have been their big strategic error in an economic sense, was in that first 3 or 4 months, they got maybe spooked into thinking they really needed to just turn everything off, or it seemed like that's how you make things happen. You just stop them dead. But in the process, they sucked the momentum out of the economy at the time, just as the high interest rates were hitting.
I'm not seeking to defend that. I think I agree, but it took me a while to work out that's what's sort of going on. They're coming off the back of massive growth in government expenditure, capital and operating by a government responding to a pandemic and an inflation situation that had to be managed. And they barely even touched fiscal policy compared to anything that might resemble austerity, in my view. So
Just finally, for me at least, Patrick, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this because it's not easy. But you wrote a really good column this week, just ahead of the naming of the new Reserve Bank governor. What did you think of the new governor and how it's shaped up in recent months?
I don't know anything about the new governor, and I hope that she's really good. I've had lots and lots of texts and reckons and WhatsApp messages from people who think they know what's going on, and I don't think any of us know. The question is really, the question that remains for me is, would we not have been better to get somebody who knows this economy really well, and who, I'm sympathetic to the Rodney Jones view that New Zealand is an idiosyncratic economy that's very exposed to China. The people who have never worked in this environment in the Asia Pacific may take a while to learn that. The counter to that is that she may be very good at what she does and knows and how she's performed, and that she has a good team around her. Prasanna Gai, who was the obvious choice for governor of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, very highly respected macroeconomic economist at the University of Auckland. He is on the Monetary Policy Committee. That's where those decisions are made. If she's got any sense, she'll listen to Prasanna when he talks about that stuff. And he'll probably never really regret the fact that he was never responsible for deciding which members of the Commons team will keep their job.
And it will be interesting to see how she shapes the Reserve Bank around her, because it grew very quickly. It was in the shadow, if you like, of Adrian. He went 6 months ago. It's quite a long time to be without a permanent leader. And then they lost their chair in a pretty messy way. One of the things I suppose you could say about having an international candidate come in is that it's pretty hard to accuse them of being part of one tribe or the other. And also, she's in a position to really bring her own team in without any sort of legacy of people from other places she's worked at in New Zealand.
And one could argue that the Mark Carney experiment with the Bank of England worked extremely well.
I think that's an interesting point, is that there's a tendency to say, well, both the Treasury secretaries that we've had over the last decade or more didn't really work out that well, and so that's become a kind of we can't find New Zealanders to do the big jobs. But that's not actually true. There's lots of New Zealanders doing the big jobs in the public service, just the Treasury didn't do it. So there's nothing logical about saying that an international appointment to the Reserve Bank must be bad because we mucked up a couple of appointments to the Treasury. That's sort of Trump logic.
Well,
so
although
she
the
may
last,
be fine. And we have to give her a go.
Yeah, although the last Treasury Secretary from, the one before the last, actually ended up as the up as the governor of the bank, the central bank in Ireland, and is now helping to set European central bank monetary policy. So it is. It will be an interesting time. Patrick, wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Patrick. We'll have you on to discuss dinosaurs again soon.
Yes,
okay,
we definitely need to buy you a beer for coming on. So thank you very much.
That's okay, no worries.
Cheers. Thanks.
I was just thinking, but maybe Patrick is the thinking person's Fran O'Sullivan, since it was her survey. We should have Fran on sometime.
Yes, the Mood of the Boardroom really is a Fran O'Sullivan special, and it's turned into quite a shindig and got a lot of attention this week. And it really put people on the spot in quite a, live on TV way. It really felt a bit like one of those Daniel and the Lions thing. Or
Survivor, yeah.
Yeah, Survivor. That's right. Financial Survivor. Yeah.
And Bernard, you've got this week's skateboarding dog, which you're going to have to act out in mime because it's a video. You idiot. Go ahead.
Yes, it is a video. I am an idiot, and I will put it into the link that goes out with the podcast. So please do click on that to look, because it's extraordinary coverage. It is a picture of a sperm whale.
It's moving pictures.
Moving pictures of a sperm whale eating a giant squid. as it comes out of the water. And it looks like, you know, how you've got a very chewy piece of calamari, except this is a whole mouthful of calamari. That's what the squid is doing. And I really needed, in an awful week of extraordinary news and comments, and I try to avoid the whole Trump circus, but, you know, the stuff that's happened this week is just off the charts. I mean, just listening to Jimmy Kimmel's monologue this week was worth the weight in gold, if only to see the pushback and to see, you know, some stirrings of fight actually in the public body in the States.
So, Bernard, can we use the whale squid thing as a metaphor? I mean, is it a Brexit metaphor? Because most things were Brexit metaphors in the past, or is it a Trump metaphor? Which one is Trump? Is Trump the squid being eaten by the whale, or is the squid?
Well, you could argue that Trump is the whale and the UN was the squid this week. But you could also say that Nigel Farage was the whale and Keir Starmer was the squid.
All right, that's enough metaphors for this week, Bernard.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
That will end up on the
everybody.
cutting room floor. Thank you very much, everyone. Ka kite anō, ngā mihi nui. That has been the Hoon on Thursday,
I'm off to have some
September the
calamari
25th.
for breakfast. Bye-bye, Bernard.
Oh, bye-bye. Catch you later.